The Warriors were staring at 7 completely different futures on draft night, each built around a different type of prospect. The safe pick, the upside swing, the system fit, the big, the guard, the faller, the sleeper, and a bonus option. They chose the safe pick. At least, that's what most people are calling him. But how safe is Yaxel Lindenborg really? In this video, we'll reflect on this choice and all the other options the Warriors passed on to make it. The last time the Golden State Warriors had the 11th overall pick, they selected Klay Thompson. Now, 15 years later, they take Yaxel. But before they were on the clock, first, Dallas pulls a fast one on us and takes Morez Johnson Jr. 9th. After hiring Dusty May, former Michigan head coach, just before the draft. With him selecting Morez first, and considerably higher than he's been mocked, with all 3 of them still on the board, that has to mean something. If Mara had gone 8th, it might have been a different story, but to have all 3 players you've just coached for a full season and got the chance to see up close and personal and really evaluate day in and day out, know all their habits, intangibles, know their games inside out, all available, and to go with one decisively over the others shows just how underrated Morez really was. I mean, just look how happy he is here. Granted, that's his guy and he's gonna be happy for him, he just got drafted, but still. And you can just tell he's his favorite. Every time Morez did something positive, you could see May on the sideline just clapping or smirking to himself. In the locker room, he sat the closest to his coach all season long and looked attentive and engaged from game 1 every time coach spoke, almost like a teacher's pet without a negative connotation. But it also just makes more sense positionally and in general, while Morez is also obviously considerably younger than Yaxel at 20. But now, this is where it gets interesting. Then that leaves Milwaukee on the clock at 10, with Brayden Burries still on the board. And you're thinking he may just fall to 11 if Milwaukee takes Nate Ament, looking to reset after trading Giannis. But unfortunately, no. They go with Burries, betting correctly that Golden State and OKC will take Yaxel and Mara, meaning they could still nab Ament at 13 with Miami's pick, which they ultimately do. Burries has been compared to Devin Booker, even by him himself, with some defensive chops as well, and I could see him having a Con Knipple-esque rise in his rookie season, depending on how much opportunity he gets and if Milwaukee keeps Tyler Hero or not. They may be beginning to have somewhat of a logjam at the combo guard position with the likes of Hero, Burries, Rollins, Yakuchonis, and Porter Jr. But I could see people just wondering how we let Milwaukee draft him all the way at 10. Though with the amount of pure talent in this draft, that's almost just the way things were meant to shake out. The Warriors may have had a chance here to move up to Dallas at 9 and select Burries, where Dallas should have still been able to take Morez at 11. Definitely something I would have been interested in. If he does become the next Devin Booker, then that's another future that the Warriors let slip through their fingers. Then we see an animated Joe Lacob arguing with a Mike Dunleavy Jr. who's trying to take some phone call in the Warriors draft war room. But maybe one day we'll know what that conversation was about. But that's the beauty of speculation. It could have been anything. Now at first, I had said that for me, I don't hate the Yaxel pick, but I did think that I would generally be a little disappointed with the fact that it's not often the Warriors get to draft in the lottery, especially in such a strong draft, and they have such a barren crop of young prospects to look forward with, or anyone to really be excited about. So I thought I might be kind of disappointed if we don't come away with someone that we can at least wish cast and project to be an all-star caliber player one day, and a core piece of the current iteration of the Warriors, as well as the post-Steph era. Though it seems that some are still wish-casting that for Yaxel, regardless, after some early Summer League performances. I still view him as a role player, especially under Kerr, the one that could be on the higher end. Like clockwork, you got the overreactionary crowd, on cue every summer, ready to bash a player or praise him, based off 1 or 2 Summer League games against inferior competition. But I've grown on the selection. First off, before we even get to his game, the first thing you notice about the kid is his personality. He's immediately likable, with a good, positive vibe about him that you just can't shake. So it's impossible to hate the pick as soon as you just start to watch him talk. And at the very least, he's someone that's going to be able to come in and contribute right away, hopefully with his game translating smoothly to the next level. And maybe even as a high-level role player, maybe that's the type of player Golden State needs more at this moment to pair with Steph Curry as they attempt to make their final couple runs here. Whatever that ends up looking like and whoever else that ends up being a part of that. And in the modern NBA, every contender needs multiple high-tier role players on value contracts. I mean, you look at how OG Anunoby starred in his role in these finals. I could see Yaxel being that type of player. Obviously, miles away from being OG defensively, but we'll see. An Aaron Gordon-esque player to slide right into Golden State's front court, plus a big playmaking forward that can hopefully shoot the three ball consistently, a decent finisher at the basket, and a solid, versatile defender. I just hope he's not closer to a Kyle Kuzma, but I think he's got a different mental makeup and competitiveness about him. And then that's not to mention his size, instantly bolstering Golden State's forward rotation, which was lacking, especially with Jimmy and Moses down, where the Warriors were already light in that department in the first place and ended the season relying on the likes of Malavai Leons at the 4 spot at times. And I believe that Yaxel might still have another level of untapped potential to reach to and will continue to grow. To what extent, we'll see, but as someone who had a late start to their basketball career, it very well may be the case. He could easily look like an early steal just based off how much more NBA ready he should be compared to some other prospects. Remember, he's going to be 24 in September, and I can already envision myself just eating my words next season as Yaxel has some really good stretches, maybe even as early as Summer League where he could dominate, and just some really good stretches where I'm absolutely loving his game. But the only way to really assess the value of the pick will be years down the line when we can see how later selections panned out in comparison to Yaxel. Who knows if there's another Tyrese Maxey somewhere in this draft who got drafted like 21st. The last time an older prospect like this was selected in the lottery, it was Chris Duarte, who is coincidentally also Dominican, but who had a really strong rookie season, but whose career then quickly stagnated to where he shortly found himself out of the league. Fun fact, Warriors owner Joe Lacob loved Duarte and was furious when Indiana selected him 1 pick before Golden State 13th. Now, Yaxel's handle is functional enough, but just a little stiff. Just kind of the way he moves in general. Almost like he has little mobility in his hips. Like he can't really bend or move, change direction too well. Just sort of a straight line drive, up and down dribble. Just upright, very stiff, not low to the ground. Something that could improve. And again, like I said, it's fluid and functional enough where he could still be that solid playmaker that he's shown himself to be. And score in the half court as well as in the open floor. But off rip, the Warriors draft you, whether you were on first on my board or last. I'm rooting for you. That's a given. However, that being said, Yaxel will never be the type of pick that you come away with saying, this could be the next star for our franchise. Of course, the last couple times the Warriors went that route in the draft lottery with the, oh, this could be our next franchise player approach, they regretted it. Nonetheless, there is still a different excitement to a James Wiseman in the early days. And I know it's hard to hear his name now and not immediately think bust. But before we knew much of anything about him, only a couple games in Memphis and an already shrouded in mystery COVID draft where there's murmurs about him being the next unicorn, comparisons to Joel Embiid.
He's a versatile big. He reminds me a little bit of Kevin Garnett. I think he's going to win Rookie of the Year.
Look, you and I both love that pick, Perk, so we'll see how it continues to pan out.
The size, the athleticism is tantalizing, tempting. Yaxel is not the sexy pick, he's the safe pick. The first type of prospect the Warriors could have gone with, and the one they ultimately did go with. There's always talent at this range in the draft. Always someone slipping down draft boards, falling out of the top 10, or a hidden gem just waiting to be swooped up. It's just about finding it and making the right selection. At a pivotal moment for the Golden State Warriors franchise, with Steph Curry pushing 40, Jimmy Butler on the wrong side of 35, and out for at least half the season with a torn ACL, the Warriors have talked 2 timelines since they had the 2nd overall pick in 2020. But if there was ever a time to start investing in the future, it was now. But they chose to go in another direction, with an older prospect who is more ready to contribute now, but perhaps lacks more flashy upside. Actually, the more I watch Yaxel tape, as much as the age kind of turned me off, the more I come away impressed with him. So maybe I don't mind it as much. And like I said, there's just not many prospects of his archetype in this draft. And most of the others I'd say are a tier below Yaxel. And he has a lot of strengths, projects to fit well into the Warriors system, and he's one of the few prospects in this range that Steve Kerr will probably trust immediately and give real opportunity to from day one. Given the Warriors' recent history with young players, right or wrong, that's an important factor when evaluating this pick. Now Yaxel, especially day one, is one of the better prospects that was remaining on the board at 11, and he's the safe pick. The high floor, slide right into an NBA lineup and contribute straight away due to his age and maturity, at least his game's maturity, if not 100% his personality according to some reports. But how safe is he really? How much of his production in college came from just being a 23-year-old man amongst boys, beating up on kids fresh out of high school, with a huge front line featuring a 7'3" center and an elite all-around defender in Morez Johnson Jr., and how much having Morez and Johnson on the back line behind him helped him defensively, where he could just funnel players into the two of them and let them clean it up at the rim. Now him forcing the offense into heavily contested finishes, knowing where his help is behind him, shows his defensive IQ. And I'm not saying he didn't still show some real defensive potential and versatility, but still, if he ever got beat, he had 2 rim protectors behind him at all times. But how about a high upside swing? Well, there weren't actually too many available where the Warriors picked. Another factor that could have influenced their decision. There is one notable name, and you could have pretty much wrote this one off, as I heard he refused to work out for the Warriors, and I think didn't want to be drafted there. And I don't blame him the least, with Steve Kerr's track record with raw, undeveloped wings. But Nate Ament would have been the pick. Someone who has been labeled as the boomer bust prospect in this draft, and I don't know if that's completely fair, but I don't think I would have wanted him for the Warriors. Not to say that he couldn't still someday be a good player, but someone you could see Steve Kerr just completely sidelining on the bench for stretches at a time throughout the season, and someone he could easily be frustrated with. I mean, if his shot's not falling, we see how Steve Kerr does even someone with elite defensive tools like a Will Richard when his shot's not falling. But 6'10" with guard skills could be the next Kevin Durant, or he could be the next Patrick Baldwin Jr., or somewhere in between. You never really know with these types of prospects. And they're never Kevin Durant. That's just the first thing that people start to yell when they see a tall prospect that can shoot the ball. I see a little bit of Rudy Gay, like a bigger Rudy, so that might be a solid middle ground in terms of projection. A more modern, optimized version on the higher end. The thing you see with Ament though is flashes. You watch his highlights, you see these elite flashes. Then you take a look at the shooting percentages and you get a better idea of how it all hasn't come together yet. As much as I say the Warriors are ready and should be ready to start looking towards the future with almost nothing to show for in that regard at this moment, I don't think Ament was the move here. Though I think his floor might be higher than some believe, I do think he's going to take some time for sure with a lot of growing pains along the way. In theory, he could have been that huge swing you take on a future star, but he's another one of those theoretical prospects, and there are just too many red flags, not to mention that it's simply not the right environment for him to grow in. But there's something about his demeanor that just strikes me as a little bit maybe soft, or I don't want to say soft, I don't like to label players that, but I'd say lacking killer instinct. Like the other day I was scrolling YouTube shorts, and there was this one that had the clip of Kobe Bryant getting drafted. You could immediately see, if you look back and watch him walk up to the podium, almost like son David Stern, and like tap him on the shoulder and just look at him like, yeah, I'm here, I'm ready. You know, it's a different vibe, a different demeanor that he gives off that you could immediately tell this guy is a different breed. Just from watching his body language on draft night. That's how simple some of these things are. You can sometimes just read a bust and vice versa. And we're talking about a kid coming into the NBA straight out of high school. I'm not saying Nate Ament is for sure going to be a bust, but I got a little bit of the wrong vibe off him. Which is kind of bad, honestly, because in real life you would see that vibe and say, oh, this seems like a nice dude, like someone I could chill with. In sports, it's almost a prerequisite to be an overconfident asshole. In college, if you're Nate Ament, a consensus 5-star recruit, you're the man by default. In the NBA, it doesn't work that way. Unless you're drafted like 1st or 2nd overall in most drafts, you're not just handed the keys to a franchise. You have to take it. I don't know if Nate Ament has that level of aggression that you need. We just watched him get phased out and fade into the background in a summer league game, let alone a live-action NBA match. The next type of player the Warriors could have taken, but also another player that could have star potential, or at least relatively high upside in comparison to those around him, would be a guard prospect, Labaron Philon Jr. Someone who somewhat surprisingly fell in the draft all the way to Philly at I think 22, but an incredibly shifty guard that immediately gives you shades of, no joke, SGA when you watch him handle the rock and get to his spots. Now I'm not saying he's gonna be SGA, but this would have been my number 1 selection in terms of a point guard prospect. Unless we had traded down for 2 picks, in which I might have advocated to go in another direction with the first and maybe snag a different guard with the second, with the likes of Ebuka Okorie, Christian Anderson, maybe even Bennett Stirtz. Only Christian Anderson, it turns out, lasted to 18 out of those 3, while Labaron Philon fell in which case he falls into your lap anyways with the later selection and take him. And him and Cameron Carr, who we'll get to later, should have absolutely been options for the Warriors to trade into the 20s and try to snag one of them. But who knows what was available for him. I think most teams actually really liked the players they had available on their respective boards and didn't want to trade out of such a strong draft. But who knows if there was something on the table for the Warriors that they turned down. Maybe more information will come out in the coming days. Maybe that has something to do with Lacob's outbursts. Nonetheless, I would have loved Labaron Philon as someone to give a whole different dimension to our offense, preserve Steph throughout the regular season, and fill in for him in his absences. If Philon becomes the kind of guard I think he could be, you're going to remember this night. And really that goes for any of the options that the Warriors passed on. But Yaxel projects to be different than, say, Moody. And that with Moses Moody, he's solid, but there's such an obvious discrepancy between him and some of the guys drafted after him. So I say it's less of a risk with Yax. Now that being said, of course, he wouldn't have provided us with a different crucial need, that being size. But though he's shorter at 6'2.5", he has a solid wingspan at 6'6+. The much more important measurable, never forget that. And I think he showed in his freshman season that he could be molded into a defender, though it took a step back in his sophomore season with an increased offensive load. And of course, since his offensive role will surely again be taking a step back in the league, he should be capable of being a scrappy defender at the very least. And I think Golden State would have been the place to pull every bit of that out of him on that end. Now we'll see if Philly can do it. Perhaps a different culture. That might be the only path for him now, with Philly also adding Anthony Simons. How can he separate himself from the rest of that backcourt? Defense. Use it as so many young prospects have before, as your ticket onto the floor, and then that gives you the chance to showcase the rest of your game. The next type of prospect was the faller. Turns out, as was kind of projected to be the case in this particular draft, no one really fell out of the top 10. The closest being, again, Brayden Burries, or maybe Kingston Flemings if Atlanta had gone big and Aday Mara instead at 8. Or maybe you consider Mara himself to be the one that fell out of the top 10. But alas, none of the other options happened, and I'm sure trading up into the top 10 was an almost impossible, not really feasible task for the most part, minus that option with Dallas I mentioned earlier. But Burries, a 6'4" combo guard, was the ideal player when it came to the next type of prospect that the Warriors could have gone after, which was the system fit. I believe Brayden Burries would have slid right into the system at Golden State, though there may have been some overlap with Brandon Podziemski, though you could just trade him, but I think he could theoretically have slid right into the 2 slot next to Steph and fit extremely well in Kerr's offense as an off-ball movement shooter and another quote-unquote connector for Kerr. When I watch him creating on the ball, I see some flashes of Jared McCain personally, but again, he's been compared to Devin Booker. I can see some of that, though with less of the mid-range game, but perhaps he could add to it depending on what type of player the Bucks mold him into. He's also been likened to Derek White with some defensive potential as well. I couldn't decide how much I liked Burries for Golden State, not that it really matters now, but he is the fundamental 2-guard mold that we've seen succeed time and time again in the NBA. Not a flashy game, just sound and composed. And I think I would have taken him if he was on the board at 11. He's an older freshman, but he's still a freshman in contrast to someone like Yaxel Lindeborg. Another player that would fall under the system fit category, in my opinion, would have been Kareem Lopez. To me, the first thing that jumps out the screen at me when I watch him is Guy Santos, but this year's Guy Santos with an increased offensive load rather than the high energy hustle glue guy Guy that got him onto the floor early in his career. Lopez has real professional experience in the NBL in Australia, and to me looks exactly like the type of player that Mike Dunleavy Jr. would draft, but I don't think you reach for him at 11. Now if Dunleavy had the say 17th pick or 19 like in 2023 when he took pods, I could absolutely have seen him drafting someone like Kareem Lopez. I think he's a decent prospect. He's younger at only 19 in April, but age doesn't always equal potential. The next type of player the Warriors could have drafted was a big. You could have used this as an opportunity to get some big man depth and insurance, and with him still on the board at 11, which definitely wasn't a guarantee, Aday Mara was an option. Personally, I'm glad they didn't go with him. I'd rather just take a gamble on an older, experienced vet 7'3" center in Kristaps Porzingis, who has championship pedigree despite the health concern. However, what you could have done was try and convince OKC that you would take Mara, depending on how in love with him they were, to see if you could trade back with them. But maybe Presti was calling their bluff, or maybe he was just cool with simply taking Yaxel as the consolation prize anyways. Morez Johnson Jr. I love as a prospect. I didn't see him mocked a lot at 11, but I think he has potential to be some version of Draymond Green with a more refined and modern offensive game. His shooting is the swing skill. He can move his feet and guard perimeter players like a Bam Adebayo or a Nick Claxton. He's incredibly versatile defensively, and he has the mechanics and the free throw percentage to bet on his shot improving at the next level. I initially saw him as a strong candidate for the Warriors to draft if they had traded back, for 2 picks, but I was worried he wouldn't survive to 14 or 18. Funny enough, he doesn't even make it to 10. The other big Golden State could have potentially looked at here was Steinbach. 6'10 center, strong rebounder, great hands. Another one with shooting as a swing skill for him, though with less evidence of really being able to get there. But there's always the sleeper pick. And this year, though I thought it'd be less so now based on his performance at the draft combine, but apparently not. But Cameron Carr might have almost even been my pick at 11. But I thought of him more as a trade back option, and a strong one. I suspected the Warriors might view Carr as a reach at 11, but I didn't expect nearly every team to view him as a reach all the way up to 24. Maybe his game is a little one-dimensional. However, the things he does do well are the core skills you need out of a wing. And it's also a testament to the strength of this draft class. He definitely would have been a clear-cut lottery pick in another draft. At least he landed in a good spot for him in LA, where he should fit well next to Luka, and I would have hated if he landed with OKC at 12. Because remember, whoever we didn't draft, we essentially just handed to OKC on a silver platter at the very next selection. However, it was Mara, whom I didn't really mind passing on. Cameron Carr is uber athletic, can really shoot, and has a ton of defensive upside with a 7-foot wingspan. He could be molded into a prototypical 3-and-D wing, a Trey Murphy or Mikal Bridges-esque prospect. And with the Warriors passing on Trey Murphy in the 2021 draft, who I desperately wanted them to select, and then since then spent years circling back to that exact archetype, he's been their #1 dream trade target for years now. Long, athletic, movement shooting, floor spacing, defensive versatility, the kind of wing every contender wants, and the kind that almost never becomes available inexpensively, which is what makes a player like Carr interesting, because instead of trying to trade a haul for that archetype later, maybe you just draft it now. Maybe this was the chance to finally rectify that decision by not passing on the next version of that prospect, by identifying that type of player before the rest of the league fully locks onto him. I think LA got immense value for him at 24, where they had to trade up to lock him in. I would have definitely advocated for trading into the draft had the price been right and taken him, or again, even Philon. Other suspected sleepers were the likes of Dailyn Swain, maybe Chris Sinak, Ebuka Okorie, who I mentioned, all of whom I initially thought of as trade down options, along with Christian Anderson, maybe even Joshua Jefferson if you really want a deep cut, though it didn't seem like many were sleeping on the likes of Swain and Okorie, at least not Chicago and Detroit. Lots of good guard depth in this draft. Bennett Stirtz even went somewhat high at 16 as the first guard of the bunch off the board, which I didn't expect. The question is whether the Warriors should have taken another guard, though they really do need everything. And on-ball scoring and creation is one of them for sure. Would you have taken a guard in this draft? If so, who? I'm sure there are more sleepers you can come up with, and maybe someone really comes out of nowhere and shocks us. That happens from time to time, but it'd be too long to list them all here. Let me know who you think is or are the hidden gems of this draft down below. So that's 7 options the Warriors were faced with in the 2026 NBA draft. 7 different directions to go in, but there's a bonus option. Besides trading down, or the opposite, which was far less likely, and trading up, but just straight up trading out of the draft, directly for a Trey Murphy or someone along those lines. Really, Trey Murphy or potentially Kawhi is all that would have been worth giving up the 11th pick for, in my opinion. But Trey Murphy would have to cost more than that. Would you have given up Draymond, Pods, and the 11th pick, along with maybe just one more future first for Trey Murphy? Would that be enough? Would you trade him Jimmy instead of Dre for Murphy and DeJounte Murray? I heard Misi could be on the move. Could you somehow come away with him too in a deal? Maybe another deal could still get done without requiring the number 11th pick. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of the different constructions of that deal. The Warriors haven't exactly had the greatest draft and development record in recent lotteries, and there's a tangible fear of missing again. Every miss hurts. Every miss lingers. Sure, Moses Moody, who's out for next season, developed eventually into something, but they passed on the likes of Trey Murphy, Şengün, and Jalen Johnson to draft it. The Kuminga saga continued on throughout the offseason and the first half of the season until he was finally anticlimactically and unceremoniously dealt to the Atlanta Hawks in exchange for Kristaps Porzingis. James Wiseman hardly lasted before being flipped back for a player they had just let walk in free agency in Gary Payton. But before that, the last time the Warriors picked 11th was in 2011, where I wanted them to select Kawhi Leonard, who went 15th, but where they selected Klay Thompson, who would become a foundational star on one of the greatest dynasties of all time. Shea, leading potentially the next budding dynasty in OKC, was selected 11th too. Giannis went 15th. In the last 11 drafts, the 11th player selected was Miles Turner, Domantas Sabonis, Malik Monk, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Cam Johnson, Devin Vassell, James Bouknight, Ousmane Dieng, Jet Howard, Matas Buzelis, and Cedric Coward. Now, Yaxel joins that list. We'll see how he holds up. A couple misses, but actually a pretty good crop of players there. Point being, there's always talent. Remember, we were only talking about the number 11 pick and not all the players drafted around that selection. There's almost certainly someone worth discovering in every draft. Did Golden State uncover that player? Who came away with the next great steal of the draft? Could that be Labaron Philon? Was Yaxel the simple answer here at 11? And is the simple answer the right answer simply because it is simple? I mean, how much did the players available and projected around 11 this year influence the direction they ultimately went in with this draft pick? How much thought really went into this selection? And how much did it just fall into their laps? This happens often in the NBA draft. The stars were aligned from the moment they came away from the draft lottery, keeping their number 11 selection for Golden State to select Yaxel with this pick. Almost a preconceived selection, and sometimes that's just how it goes. In the second round, teams have more wiggle room and teams operate with more individual thought, rankings, and subjective preferences. Also, the talent gap tends to be less extreme for teams to draft for need rather than best player available. But in the first round, especially in the lottery, teams tend to be apprehensive about selecting too far outside of the limited players projected in maybe a 3 to 5 player range from their selection. Sure, teams all have their own big boards, but also tend to go along with the consensus projections mock to some extent. And sometimes, like with Golden State this year, there just aren't too many suitable options, or one guy just makes too much sense. And in Golden State's case, it was both. Similar to how in 2020, the fact that Tyrese Haliburton was not projected to go top 3 or really anywhere near that, it was difficult for Golden State to reach, and whoever was available on the board at their selection really impacted who they ultimately took. People often talk what ifs when it comes to the 2020 draft for the Warriors. What if they had traded up for Ant? What if they took LaMelo? What if they took Tyrese? What people don't often talk about is how much the draft order prevented them, restricted them from drafting a much more favorable option in Tyrese. If they had, let's say, the 8th pick in the draft, it wouldn't have been such a reach to take Haliburton, who some in the organization liked, and I wouldn't have been surprised if they had ultimately selected him there. Now, this is a guard-heavy draft as well, so that also played a part in who the Warriors went to here. There are only so many wings in this range, and if the Warriors were dead set on adding a wing forward type, or at least not adding a guard, then that essentially pushed them in a limited direction of only 1 or 2 real guys here. That's why you'd heard him mocked to the Warriors at 11 a million times. The safe pick, Yaxel Lindeborg. It's funny because under normal circumstances, besides the age, Yaxel would be the quintessential model type prospect that I would draft. Long, athletic, jack of all trades, enough skills in enough areas to where you can sort of mold them into whatever kind of prospect you want them to be. In the sense that a Kawhi Leonard was as a prospect coming out of San Diego State. My issue is who Kerr would likely mold him into. And that having Kerr back at the helm sort of forced them in that direction, having less optionality or consideration for other options. Certain ones you're unsure if Kerr would trust or play, and others you know he wouldn't. We all know Steve Kerr, at the top of his board, maybe much higher than 11, would be a soon-to-be 24-year-old grown man over a 19, 20-year-old prospect. Who would you have taken with the 11th? Who would you have taken if we had traded back for, say, 14 and 18? The Warriors didn't just have one decision. They had several competing philosophies they could follow to take them down separate paths long-term. A ready-now contributor, an upside swing, overlooked value, best player available. But they've placed their bets now, and they made a decision that could begin to define the next era of Warriors basketball. Because that's what makes this part of the draft so fascinating. The stars are mostly gone, though you never know. But the value isn't. You just have to find it. And if you don't, you've just handed it to someone else. Leave your thoughts, feelings, and perspectives in the comment section down below, and I'll be back very soon. I know I've been gone for a very, very long time. Hopefully this is the start of a fresh new era for the channel, as well as for the Golden State Warriors. If you're a returning subscriber, what up? Thanks for checking back in after all this time. We're going to be back with more of the content that you're used to from the old days soon, with more NBA stories and basketball content where journalism meets storytelling. And I'm out. Peace.